Imagine, just for a moment, that you are a young man in 1946. You have just spent the last 3 years of your life in the muddy trenches of France, or perhaps fighting island to island in the sweltering Pacific. You have seen your friends die. You have killed men to survive. You have witnessed the absolute worst that humanity has to offer, all under the banner of fighting tyranny and preserving freedom. Now you step off the bus in your hometown. The dust of McMinn County, Tennessee, settles on your polished boots. You aren't asking for a parade. You just want a job, a quiet life, and the right to vote for the people who run your town. But instead of freedom, you find a dictatorship. You find that while you were destroying fascism in Europe, it was taking root in your own backyard. Deputies who never served a day in the war shake you down for money. If you try to vote, you are beaten with brass knuckles. If you complain, you are thrown in jail. Most men would keep their heads down. But you and your brothers are not most men. You are the greatest generation, and you still know how to use a rifle. This is the story of the Battle of Athens. It is the story of the night American soldiers declared war on their own government, and the night they blew up a jailhouse to save a ballot box. To understand how a quiet Tennessee county became a war zone, we have to look at the political machine that was suffocating it. For 10 years, McMinn County had been the personal fiefdom of a man named Paul Cantrell. Cantrell came from a wealthy, influential family, and in the mid-1930s, he built a political engine that ran on fear and grease. The system was brutally simple. In Tennessee at the time, the sheriff and his deputies were paid on a fee system. This meant they didn't get a flat salary. They got paid for every person they booked, every prisoner they fed, and every fine they collected. It was a system designed for corruption. Cantrell, who served as sheriff before moving to the state senate, installed his crony, Pat Mansfield, to fill the sheriff's seat. Together, they turned law enforcement into a for-profit business. They hired deputies not based on merit, but on their willingness to crack skulls. Many of these deputies were ex-convicts. They prowled the roads looking for anyone to arrest. A tourist driving through Athens might be pulled over for speeding and fined heavily on the spot. But the locals had it worse. Farmers were arrested for drunkenness when they were stone sober. If you couldn't pay the fine, you went to the workhouse, and the sheriff pocketed the money the state paid to feed you. Between 1936 and 1946, it is estimated that over $300,000, a fortune in those days, was embezzled from public funds. But it wasn't just about the money. It was about control. Cantrell and Mansfield rigged the elections. They controlled who voted and who counted the votes. In precinct after precinct, dead people voted. Voting urns were stuffed. Opposition poll watchers were physically thrown out of counting rooms, or worse, arrested. For a decade, the people of Athens simmered in silence. They were afraid. The Department of Justice investigated, but nothing changed. The machine seemed invincible. But then World War II ended. In 1945 and early 1946, the boys came home. McMinn County had sent over 3,000 men to fight in the war. These weren't the same wide-eyed farm boys who had left a few years prior. They were combat veterans. They were disciplined, they were fearless, and they were incredibly tight-knit. When they returned, they became the primary targets of the deputies. The deputies, often men who had dodged the draft, resented the veterans. They targeted GIs for shakedowns. In the first few months of 1946, veterans were being arrested on trumped-up charges almost daily. One veteran recounted coming home and being fined for public intoxication before he'd even had a drink. Another was beaten simply for looking at a deputy the wrong way. The simmering pot began to boil. The veterans started meeting in secret. They realized that the freedom they had fought for in Normandy and Iwo Jima was a lie in Athens, Tennessee. They decided they had to do something. They formed a political party. They called it the GI Nonpartisan League. They put up a slate of candidates for the upcoming election on August 1, 1946. Their candidate for sheriff was Knox Henry, a decorated veteran of the North African Campaign. The campaign was vicious. The Cantrell machine used every dirty trick in the book. They threatened local business owners who supported the GIs. They fired shots into the homes of veteran leaders. Sheriff Mansfield made it clear. The GIs would not be allowed to win. But the veterans had a plan. They knew the election would be stolen during the vote count. So they organized a security detail. They promised to place veteran poll watchers at every precinct to ensure the count was fair. August 1st, 1946. Election day. The air was thick with humidity and tension. The town of Athens looked like an occupied city. Sheriff Mansfield had called in reinforcements from neighboring counties. There were hundreds of armed deputies patrolling the streets. They were armed with blackjacks, pistols, and sawed-off shotguns. The trouble started early. At one polling place, an elderly black farmer named Tom Gillespie stepped up to vote. The Cantrell machine didn't want the black vote, which they couldn't control. A deputy blocked Gillespie's path. "Nigger, you can't vote here," the deputy shouted. Gillespie, a man of quiet dignity, insisted he had a right to cast his ballot. The deputy pulled his pistol and pistol-whipped Gillespie. As the old man stumbled away, the deputy shot him in the back. The shot rang out through the town. Gillespie was dragged away, bleeding. He would survive, but that bullet shattered the fragile peace. News of the shooting spread like wildfire among the veterans. They were furious, but they held their discipline. They were waiting for the polls to close. Throughout the day, GI poll watchers were harassed. In one precinct, 2 veteran poll watchers were dragged outside and beaten senseless. At another, armed deputies seized the ballot box before the count was finished and threw it into a patrol car. By 3:00 p.m., the Cantrell machine decided they had seen enough. They declared the polls closed hours early in several key precincts. Deputies grabbed the ballot boxes and took them to the safest place they knew, the county jail. The jail in Athens was a fortress. It was a heavy brick building, sitting on a hill surrounded by a wire fence. Sheriff Mansfield, Paul Cantrell, and dozens of their most loyal deputies barricaded themselves inside. They had the ballot boxes. They had the guns. And they began to count the votes in secret, guaranteeing their own victory. The veterans had a choice. They could go home, accept the defeat, and live under the boot of the machine for another 10 years. Or they could fight. They gathered at their campaign headquarters. These were men who had stormed beaches and held lines against tanks. The decision was unanimous. They were not going to let the election be stolen. But they needed weapons. The deputies had confiscated the GI's pistols weeks earlier. A group of veterans raided the National Guard armory. It was empty. The machine had anticipated this. But the veterans were resourceful. They went to their own homes and retrieved squirrels' guns and hunting rifles. Then a few of them managed to secure keys to the National Guard armory in a neighboring town, or by some accounts, raided a local hardware store. They returned with M1 Garands, Thompson submachine guns, and thousands of rounds of ammunition. By sunset, the streets of Athens were deserted. The civilians had fled. The silence was eerie. Around 9:00 p.m., a line of armed men emerged from the shadows. There were hundreds of them. They moved with military precision, flanking the jailhouse. They took up positions on the rooftops across the street and behind the parked cars on the slope leading up to the jail. The leader of the GIs, a man named Bill White, called out to the jail. "Bring those ballot boxes out. We want a fair count." The response from the jail was a shout of "You won't get them," followed by a burst of gunfire. The Battle of Athens had begun. The night erupted into chaos. Tracer rounds zipped across the street. The deputies inside the jail had the high ground and thick brick walls for cover. They fired indiscriminately from the windows. The veterans returned fire, suppressing the deputies, shattering the windows and pinning them down. It was a full-scale firefight in the middle of an American town. The locals who hadn't fled watched from safe distances, terrified and mesmerized. The sound of automatic weapons fire echoed off the surrounding hills. The battle raged for hours. The veterans were tactically superior, but the jail was a tough nut to crack. They couldn't storm the building without taking heavy casualties, and they didn't want to kill the deputies if they didn't have to. They just wanted the ballot boxes. As midnight approached, the stalemate continued. The veterans were running low on ammunition. They knew that if they didn't end this before dawn, the National Guard or the state police would arrive, and they would all be arrested for treason. They needed a game changer. They needed dynamite. Some of the veterans had experience with explosives from the war. They managed to procure several sticks of dynamite. The plan was risky. They had to get close enough to the jail to throw the explosives without getting shot. The first stick was thrown. It landed in the street, a dud. The second stick was thrown. It exploded near the sheriff's car, flipping it over, but the jail held firm. Around 2:30 a.m., the veterans decided to escalate. They taped several sticks of dynamite together. A brave veteran crawled through the grass, avoiding the hail of bullets from the jail windows. He reached the porch of the jail, lit the fuse, and scrambled back. The explosion was massive. It blew the porch door off its hinges and shattered the front facade of the jail. The concussion knocked the deputies inside off their feet. Dust and smoke filled the air. The firing from the jail stopped. A few moments later, a white flag, actually a white shirt tied to a broom handle, waved from the shattered doorway. "We give up," a voice screamed. "Don't shoot," the veterans held their fire. Slowly, the deputies began to file out. They walked out with their hands up, coughing in the smoke, looking terrified. The once arrogant enforcers of the machine were now trembling before the men they had tormented. Paul Cantrell and Sheriff Mansfield were not among them. In the confusion of the night, they had slipped out the back way and fled town, abandoning their men. The crowd of veterans surged forward. Some wanted to beat the deputies. Some wanted to lynch them. The anger was raw. But the leaders, men like Bill White and Knox Henry, stepped in. "We are not murderers," they told their men. "We are here for justice." They marched the deputies to the town square and locked them up. Then the most important moment of the night arrived. The veterans entered the ruined jailhouse. There in the corner, safe and sound, were the ballot boxes. The veterans carried them out into the street. The sun was just beginning to rise over the Tennessee hills. A cheer went up from the crowd that had gathered. They took the boxes to the courthouse. Under the guard of the armed GIs, the votes were counted, fairly this time. The result was a landslide. The GI Nonpartisan League had won every seat. Knox Henry was the new sheriff. The Cantrell machine was broken. The aftermath of the battle was almost as stunning as the fight itself. The story made national headlines. People across America were shocked. There was fear that this would spark a wave of armed insurrections across the country. Eleanor Roosevelt wrote about the incident, warning that if government fails the people will take matters into their own hands. But surprisingly, there were no mass arrests. The public sentiment was overwhelmingly on the side of the veterans. They had not attacked the government to overthrow it. They had attacked it to restore it. They were viewed not as traitors, but as liberators. The governor of Tennessee, who was an ally of Cantrell, was furious, but he dared not send in the National Guard to arrest war heroes. The political cost would have been too high. So the veterans of Athens, Tennessee, went back to their lives. They hung up their rifles. They went to work. They raised their families. The corrupt deputies were fired. The fee system for sheriffs was eventually abolished in Tennessee, largely due to the scandal exposed by the battle. But why is this story not taught in every history class? Why is the Battle of Athens largely forgotten? Perhaps it makes us uncomfortable. It blurs the lines we like to draw. We like to think of democracy as a system of peaceful transition, of speeches and ballots. We don't like to remember that at its core, democracy is a fragile thing, and sometimes it requires blood to preserve. The Battle of Athens stands as a stark reminder. It reminds us that the rights we enjoy are not guaranteed by a piece of paper. They are guaranteed by the willingness of free people to defend them. These men, these mechanics and farmers and shopkeepers didn't want to fight. But when the fight came to them, they didn't back down. They proved that the spirit that stormed the beaches of Normandy was alive and well in the hills of Tennessee. In the end, the Battle of Athens wasn't just about a local election. It was a message sent from a small town in 1946 to every generation that follows. The message is simple. Power belongs to the people. And if you try to take it away, you might just find out what free men are capable of. As you look at the old black and white photos of those young men, standing in the rubble of the jailhouse, smiling, holding their rifles, you realize something profound. They weren't insurrectionists. They were the ultimate patriots. They held the line. And because of them, democracy in McMinn County survived. So the next time you cast a vote, remember the boys of Athens. Remember the night the ballot box was saved by the bullet. And remember that freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. Thank you for watching. If you found this story as compelling as we did, please hit that like button and subscribe for more hidden history.